Nobody expected the final reunion taping to end like this. What was supposed to be a celebration of years of friendships, rivalries, and unforgettable moments turned into absolute chaos when one cast member stood up, pointed across the stage, and shouted words that instantly changed everything. "You've been lying to everybody for months." The room went silent. For a split second, nobody moved. The hosts froze. Security looked at each other. Even the loudest cast members seemed shocked by what they had just heard. Then all hell broke loose. Within seconds, accusations started flying from every direction. Old betrayals that had been buried suddenly resurfaced. Private messages were exposed. Secret recordings were mentioned. And before anyone could calm the situation down, two longtime friends found themselves screaming face to face in the middle of the stage. Fans watching from the audience could hardly believe what they were seeing. One cast member stormed off in tears. Another demanded producers stop filming immediately. And then came the moment that left everyone speechless. A surprise guest walked onto the set carrying information that nobody knew existed. Suddenly, the argument wasn't just about friendship anymore. It became about loyalty. It became about money. And most importantly, it became about a secret that threatened to destroy relationships that had taken years to build. As emotions ran high, family members backstage began taking sides. Some defended the accusations, others claimed the entire story was fabricated. The family was left divided as rumors spread through the studio like wildfire. But the biggest shock was still waiting. Just when everyone thought the situation couldn't get worse, a physical confrontation erupted near the reunion stage, forcing security to rush in as producers desperately tried to regain control. By the end of the night, friendships were shattered, alliances were destroyed, and several cast members were left questioning whether they would ever speak to each other again. Now fans are shocked, social media is exploding, and everyone is asking the same question. What really happened during the final moments that turned the biggest reunion in love and hip-hop history into complete chaos? The tension inside the studio was already impossible to ignore. Long before the cameras officially began rolling, cast members were exchanging cold stares from opposite sides of the stage. Producers noticed it immediately. Something felt different this time. The usual reunion nerves had been replaced by something much darker. Whispers spread backstage as crew members rushed between dressing rooms, carrying messages nobody wanted to repeat out loud. Every person seemed to know a secret, but nobody knew the entire story. One cast member sat quietly in a corner, scrolling through her phone, while another paced back and forth, demanding answers from production. Several friendships had been hanging by a thread for months, but nobody expected those threads to snap in front of millions of viewers. The moment filming started, the atmosphere became even heavier. Questions about old feuds quickly turned into discussions about betrayal. At first, the cast attempted to keep their emotions under control. They laughed nervously and exchanged sarcastic comments. However, underneath every smile was obvious anger waiting to explode. Then the conversation shifted toward a business deal that had allegedly gone wrong. One cast member leaned forward and looked directly across the stage. "You really want to talk about loyalty?" The room became quiet. Another cast member folded her arms. "Say what you have to say." The first woman laughed bitterly. "Oh, trust me, I'm about to." Gasps came from several people seated nearby. The host tried to move the conversation forward, but it was too late. Months of frustration suddenly poured out. According to the accusations, one cast member had secretly been working behind the scenes to damage another person's reputation. Private conversations had allegedly been shared with outsiders. Opportunities had supposedly been stolen. Friendships had allegedly been manipulated for personal gain. Every new claim made the room more uncomfortable. "That's a lie," someone shouted. "Then explain the messages." "What messages?" Everybody has seen. Suddenly, heads turned in every direction. Nobody knew exactly which messages were being discussed, yet several cast members looked visibly nervous. Fans in the audience could sense something major was coming. Then another shocking voice entered the conversation. "I saw them myself." Everybody turned. A longtime friend of both women was now speaking. The statement immediately changed everything. For years, she had remained neutral during arguments. She rarely picked sides. Her decision to speak shocked everyone. "You're not telling the whole story," she continued. The accused cast member looked stunned. "What are you talking about?" Murmurs spread across the audience. The accused woman shook her head. "This is ridiculous." But her confidence appeared to be fading. The friend continued, "You promised me nobody would ever find out." The room exploded. Several cast members jumped from their seats. Others covered their mouths in disbelief. The host repeatedly asked everyone to calm down, but nobody was listening anymore. Emotions ran high as years of hidden resentment surfaced all at once. One cast member began crying. Another started yelling over everyone else. Security quietly moved closer to the stage. The argument grew more chaotic with every passing second. Then came another twist nobody expected. A cast member who had remained silent the entire reunion suddenly stood up. She looked directly at the accused woman. "Tell them where you were 3 months ago." The studio froze. The accused woman blinked. "What?" "Tell them. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Everybody watched nervously. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the standing cast member reached into her purse. She pulled out her phone. The audience immediately erupted. "Don't do it," someone warned. "She forced my hand." The accused woman suddenly looked panicked. For the first time all evening, she seemed genuinely worried. Producers rushed toward the stage. The host attempted to stop what was happening, but the cast member was determined. "You lied to everybody sitting here." She raised her phone. "And I have proof." Screaming immediately broke out. People jumped from their chairs. Security stepped closer. The family was left divided as accusations flew across the stage. Friends who had spent years defending each other were suddenly taking opposite sides. Nobody knew who was telling the truth anymore. The cast member holding the phone opened a conversation thread. She stared directly at her former friend. "Last chance." The accused woman shook her head. "You're making a huge mistake." "Am I?" The room waited. Seconds felt like hours. Then the cast member began reading. The messages described secret meetings, private conversations, plans that had supposedly been hidden from everyone else. With every sentence, the accused woman's face grew paler. Some cast members appeared shocked. Others looked angry. A few seemed strangely unsurprised. It was becoming obvious that certain people had known pieces of the story long before the reunion began. The audience could barely keep up. Every revelation created 10 more questions. Then another cast member suddenly shouted something that changed the entire direction of the argument. Forget the messages. Everyone looked toward him. His expression was furious. "Tell them about the money." The studio instantly erupted again. "What money?" Multiple voices demanded. The man pointed directly across the stage. "The money that disappeared." Now even the host looked confused. The accused woman buried her face in her hands. For a moment, she appeared overwhelmed. But then something changed. Slowly, she stood up. She looked around the room. Her eyes moved from one cast member to another. The tears disappeared. And what replaced them made everyone nervous. She started smiling. It was not the smile of someone caught in a lie. It was the smile of someone who knew a much bigger secret. "You people really think I'm the villain?" she asked quietly. Nobody answered. She laughed. "If I start talking tonight, every single person on this stage is going down with me." The room fell completely silent. Even security stopped moving. Because for the first time all evening, it sounded like she was preparing to expose something far bigger than anyone had imagined. The silence that followed her warning felt heavier than any argument that had happened all night. Nobody laughed, nobody rolled their eyes, nobody even tried interrupting her. The confidence in her voice had completely changed the atmosphere. Moments earlier, she had looked cornered. Now she looked like the person holding all the cards. Several cast members exchanged nervous glances, while others suddenly became very interested in staring at the floor. The audience could feel the shift immediately. Whatever secret she was about to reveal was clearly something many people did not want discussed on camera. She slowly looked across the stage and shook her head. All of you came here ready to blame me, she said. But none of you thought about what would happen if I started telling the truth. One cast member immediately pointed at her. Don't try to flip this around. She laughed again. Flip it around. I've spent months protecting people sitting on this stage. That statement caused another wave of reactions. Several cast members began talking at once. Accusations flew from every direction. Producers were struggling to maintain control as emotions ran high. The host repeatedly asked for one person to speak at a time, but nobody seemed interested in following the rules anymore. Then the woman took a deep breath and spoke a name nobody expected to hear. The reaction was instant. Jaws dropped so quickly that his chair nearly fell backward. Another woman covered her face with both hands. Don't you dare, somebody shouted. Why not? She fired back. You weren't worried about protecting me. The tension reached another level. Suddenly, it became clear that the story everyone thought they were discussing was only a small piece of a much larger situation. According to her, several cast members had secretly formed alliances months earlier. They had been sharing information, planning confrontations, and coordinating stories behind the scenes while pretending to be enemies in public. The revelation stunned the room. Friendships that viewers believed were completely broken might not have been broken at all. Rivalries that appeared genuine suddenly seemed questionable. One cast member immediately denied everything. That's nonsense. She turned toward him. Really? She asked. Want me to tell them what happened at the hotel? The man's face changed instantly. The audience gasped. You have no idea what you're talking about, he said, but his voice lacked confidence. She smiled. That's what I thought. Whispers spread throughout the audience. Fans watching this unfold could hardly believe it. Every answer seemed to create three more questions. Every accusation uncovered another layer of drama. Then another cast member decided she had heard enough. She jumped into the argument and pointed directly at the woman making the claims. Stop acting innocent. Tell them about the recording. The room exploded once again. What recording? Multiple people shouted at the same time. Suddenly, everybody wanted answers. The woman hesitated for the first time all evening. That hesitation was all anyone needed to see. Immediately, several cast members started speaking over one another. See? One yelled. Tell the truth. Another added, you don't want them hearing that part. The host leaned forward. What recording are they talking about? For several seconds, nobody answered. Then one of the cast members quietly said, there's a recording of a private conversation. Complete silence followed. What conversation? The host asked. Nobody responded. The woman stared at the floor before finally lifting her head. It was never supposed to leave my phone. Gasps filled the studio. Now everyone was paying attention. According to the story being told, a private conversation had allegedly been recorded months earlier during a heated dispute. The recording reportedly contained statements that could damage multiple relationships and expose secrets several people wanted hidden. The problem was that nobody knew who currently possessed the recording. Rumors suggested it had been copied, shared, and passed between different people behind the scenes. Some claimed producers knew about it. Others insisted they did not. One cast member suddenly stood up. This is exactly why nobody trusts anybody anymore. Another immediately fired back. Trust? You're talking about trust? What followed was one of the loudest arguments of the night. Years of resentment poured out in every direction. Old betrayals were revisited. Personal attacks became more aggressive. Friendships that had survived countless conflicts suddenly appeared beyond repair. The family was left divided as cast members chose sides. Some defended the woman making the accusations. Others believed she was desperately trying to distract attention from her own actions. Meanwhile, fans in the audience watched in complete disbelief as the reunion spiraled further out of control. Then came another shocking development. A producer suddenly walked onto the stage. That almost never happened. Cast members immediately noticed. The producer approached the host and whispered something in his ear. Whatever was said caused the host's expression to change immediately. What happened? Someone asked. Nobody answered. The producer quickly stepped away. Now everyone looked concerned. The host adjusted his microphone and tried to regain control. We need a moment, he said. But before anyone could move forward, one cast member stood up and shouted across the stage, "Is this about the documents?" The reaction was immediate. Several people looked horrified. What documents? Another person asked. Nobody answered right away. Suddenly, the producer who had tried to leave froze in place. The audience sensed something significant was happening. Then the cast member repeated the question. Is it about the documents? The woman at the center of the controversy slowly closed her eyes. She looked exhausted, frustrated, defeated. Then she opened them again. You know what? She said quietly. I'm tired of protecting everybody. Several people immediately began shouting for her to stop. Others begged her to continue. Security moved closer once again. Emotions ran high. The atmosphere felt seconds away from complete disaster. She reached into her bag and removed a small envelope. Nobody had noticed it before. Every eye in the room locked onto the envelope. Some cast members looked confused. Others looked terrified. She held it up for everyone to see. You all wanted the truth, she said. Well, the truth is right here. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The entire studio seemed frozen because whatever was inside that envelope had the power to destroy reputations and friendships and possibly expose secrets that had been hidden for years. And as she slowly began opening it, several cast members looked like they already knew exactly what was about to come out. The moment her fingers touched the edge of the envelope, the entire studio seemed to tighten with anticipation. Even the background crew had stopped moving. Cameras stayed locked in place, capturing every small detail, every change in expression, every breath that felt too heavy to hide. The woman looked around one more time before speaking, her voice quieter now, but still sharp enough to cut through the silence. You all pushed this to the point where there's no turning back, she said. Nobody answered. Not because they agreed, but because nobody wanted to be the first to react. She slowly opened the envelope and pulled out a set of printed pages. The paper looked ordinary, but the reaction it triggered was anything but. One cast member immediately shook his head. Another whispered, "This is going too far." The host tried to step in again, raising his hand, asking everyone to stay calm, but the control he once had over the room was completely gone. She scanned the first page, then looked up. These are bank transfers, she said. The words hit the room like a sudden drop in temperature. A few people laughed nervously as if disbelief could undo what they were hearing. Bank transfers? To who? Someone asked from the side. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she flipped the page slowly, deliberately, as if making sure every second of suspense landed exactly where she wanted it. To people sitting in this studio, she finally said. That was enough to trigger chaos again. Voices overlapped instantly. That's fake, one cast member shouted. Prove it, another demanded. But the tension in the accused faces said more than words ever could. A few of them avoided eye contact completely. Others stared at the pages like they already knew what was on them, but hoped nobody else would connect the dots. Then a new voice cut through the noise. Stop lying! A cast member yelled, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. He pointed across the stage, his hand shaking slightly. You were part of it too. The accusation shifted the entire direction of the argument again. Heads turned. Confusion spread. The woman with the envelope narrowed her eyes. Part of what? She asked. He hesitated, just for a second, but that second was enough for everyone to notice. You know exactly what, he replied, but his voice lacked the certainty he needed. That hesitation created cracks in his own position. Another cast member immediately jumped in. Don't back out now. Say it properly. The pressure built on him until he finally spoke again, but this time more carefully. You were there when the deal was discussed. The word deal triggered a fresh wave of reactions. Some people laughed in disbelief. Others looked down, almost ashamed. The host leaned forward, clearly trying to understand the direction this had taken. "What deal are we talking about?" he asked. Nobody answered him directly. Instead, the woman holding the envelope continued speaking. "This is not just about arguments or friendships," she said. "This is about planning outcomes, controlling narratives, deciding who looks guilty before anything even happens." That statement made the room feel even smaller. Several cast members began speaking at once again, but their voices lacked coordination. It was no longer a debate. It was fragmentation. Everyone was defending themselves or shifting blame elsewhere. Then, unexpectedly, a quieter cast member, who had barely spoken all night, finally stood up. She looked nervous, almost unwilling to be part of what was unfolding. But she spoke anyway. "You're all pretending like this started last month," she said softly. The room slowed again. This started way before the reunion. That single line shifted the entire foundation of the argument. Now it was not just personal drama. It was something structured, something planned, something far deeper than anyone had admitted on camera before. A few cast members immediately reacted with anger. "Don't drag contracts into this," one said sharply. But the damage was done. The idea had already entered the room. The woman with the envelope looked at the others one by one. Her expression had changed completely now. There was no panic, no hesitation, only exhaustion mixed with determination. "You all wanted me to stay quiet," she said. "You all told me it would be handled off camera." That line caused a noticeable reaction from at least 3 people who immediately started talking over each other. "That's not true," one insisted. "We never said that." But the denial came too late and too loudly to feel convincing. The audience was now fully locked into every detail, reacting to every shift in tone, every pause, every glance. Suddenly, a loud interruption came from the side of the stage. Security had moved closer again, but this time it wasn't just precaution. A producer was speaking urgently into a headset, and the energy around the crew had changed. Something outside the cast's control was happening behind the scenes. The host noticed it immediately. He stepped slightly forward, trying to regain authority. "We need to pause this conversation," he said firmly. But before anyone could react to that statement, another cast member raised his voice from the back row. "You can't pause it now. It's already out." That line hung in the air longer than anything else that night. The woman with the envelope looked at him directly. "You're right," she said quietly. "It is out." She then placed the papers down on the table in front of her, not throwing them, not dropping them, but setting them carefully as if finalizing something irreversible. The sound of the paper touching the surface seemed louder than expected. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. Even the most vocal cast members seemed unsure of their next move. Then she added something that shifted everything again. "And this is only the first set." That sentence alone caused a visible reaction across the stage. Eyes widened. Whispers spread instantly. One cast member muttered, "There's more?" Another shook his head repeatedly, as if refusing to accept what was being implied. The host looked genuinely unsettled now. The control he had tried to maintain all evening had completely dissolved. The woman stepped back slightly, looking at the group she once considered allies, friends, even family in some cases. "You wanted a final fight," she said. "You got it. But don't act surprised when it doesn't end the way you expected." For the first time, nobody responded immediately. The energy in the room had shifted from explosive to uncertain, like everyone was waiting for something worse, something final, something that had not yet revealed itself. And in that uneasy silence, it became clear that the reunion was no longer just about conflict. It had turned into a collapse, where every truth revealed only led to another deeper secret waiting to come out. The silence did not last long. It never could in a room already soaked in tension. As soon as the last sentence settled, a cast member at the far end of the stage suddenly laughed, but it was not a real laugh. It sounded broken, almost forced. "You think you're the only one with papers?" he said, leaning forward. That single remark changed the direction of everything again. Heads turned sharply. The woman at the center of the storm narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she asked. He slowly reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded document. It looked older, creased, handled too many times. "You've been running your version of the story for months," he said. "Now it's time for mine." The host immediately stepped in, raising his voice. "Nobody is showing anything else right now." But no one was listening anymore. The cast member unfolded the paper anyway. "This is a signed agreement," he said, "between people in this room." The reaction was instant. Several people stood up at once. Chairs moved back. Someone shouted, "Stop him!" Another voice overlapped, "He's lying." But the paper was already visible. Cameras zoomed in. Producers behind the scenes were clearly in panic. But nothing could be pulled back now. The woman with the envelope took a step forward. "You're talking about an agreement that never existed," she said firmly. But he shook his head. "It existed, and you were there." That statement landed heavily. The room shifted again. Uncertainty replaced anger for a brief moment because now multiple versions of the same events were colliding. A third cast member suddenly spoke up, quieter than the rest. "I saw that paper before," she said. That confession caused a ripple effect. People started talking over each other again, trying to understand who knew what and when. The accused woman looked around slowly. "So this is what it is," she said. "Everyone remembers just enough to protect themselves." Her voice was calm now, but that calmness carried weight. She turned slightly toward the host. "You brought us here to resolve things," she said, "but you already knew this would happen." The host looked visibly uncomfortable. He tried to respond, but paused. That pause said more than any explanation could. Then another shift came from the audience side. A fan in the crowd shouted something unclear, but it triggered a reaction from security. The atmosphere tightened again. Producers moved faster behind the scenes. Someone in the control area was clearly giving urgent instructions. The cast noticed it too. "What's going on backstage?" one of them asked. No answer came. The man holding the document tapped it once. "This isn't just about arguments," he said again. "This is about decisions that affected people outside the stage." That line changed the emotional weight of everything. It was no longer limited to pride or jealousy. It now felt like consequences spreading beyond entertainment. Several cast members went quiet at the same time. A few exchanged uneasy looks, as if realizing they might be tied to something they never fully understood. The woman with the envelope finally spoke again. "You keep trying to shift attention," she said, "but you're still not answering the same question." She stepped closer. "Who started this chain?" The question hung in the air. No one answered immediately. The man with the document looked down for a second, then back up. "It doesn't matter who started it," he said. "It matters who benefited from it." That answer only made things worse, because now everyone was calculating in their heads. Another cast member suddenly raised her voice. "This is all staged," she said. "You're all performing right now." That accusation triggered immediate backlash. "Don't disrespect me like that," someone replied. Voices rose again. Fingers pointed. Years of tension surfaced without warning. The studio once again turned into overlapping arguments, with no single thread holding it together. But then something unexpected happened. The woman at the center of the envelope story sat down. That small action shocked a few people. She looked tired now, not defeated, but done with shouting. She placed her hands on the table and said quietly, "You all keep talking about proof, but proof doesn't matter anymore." That sentence cut through the noise. Slowly, the arguing started to fade again. The host leaned forward carefully. "What do you mean it doesn't matter?" he asked. She looked at him. "Because everything you needed to fix this was ignored before today," she said. "Now it's just damage control." The word damage made the room tense again, but differently this time. Not explosive, but uneasy. The man with the document suddenly stepped back. For the first time, he looked unsure. "This is getting out of hand," he muttered. But another cast member immediately responded, It already is out of hand. That simple truth settled over the room like dust after impact. And in that moment, as everyone tried to figure out what to say next, a producer walked onto the stage again, but this time with no hesitation. The entire cast turned toward him at once. His expression was serious, controlled, final. He leaned toward the host and spoke quietly, but the reaction on the host's face made it clear that whatever had just been said would change the rest of the night completely. The host slowly looked up at the cast, then said one sentence that nobody expected to hear, and everything that had been building up until now felt like it was only the beginning of something much larger about to break open. The host stood still for a moment longer than anyone expected, as if he was deciding whether the next words should even be spoken on camera. The studio felt sealed, like sound itself had become heavier. Every cast member watched him closely now, waiting for the line that would either calm everything or destroy what little control remained. Finally, he adjusted his microphone and looked toward the group. "We have been instructed to pause the reunion taping effective immediately," he said. There was no dramatic tone in his voice, only tension and caution. But the effect of those words was immediate. A wave of disbelief moved through the stage. For a second, nobody reacted. Then everything broke at once. "Pause? What do you mean, pause?" one cast member shouted, stepping forward. Another laughed in frustration. "After all this, you're shutting it down now?" Voices overlapped again, but this time it was different. It was not just anger, it was panic mixed with confusion, like people feared the pause meant something far bigger was being hidden from them. The woman with the envelope stood up slowly again, watching the host closely. "You see?" she said quietly. "This is what I was talking about." The producer who had walked on stage earlier moved closer to the host and whispered again. But this time the host shook his head slightly, refusing to engage further in front of everyone. That refusal only deepened suspicion. A cast member pointed at the production side. "What are you not telling us?" he demanded. No answer came. Instead, security began moving in a more organized pattern, not reacting to the cast anymore, but preparing to separate people if needed. Then the man with the document suddenly raised his voice again. "No one is leaving until this is clear," he said firmly. That statement immediately caused tension with security. One guard stepped closer, speaking quietly but firmly, asking him to step back. He refused. "You brought us here for truth," he said, turning toward the audience. "Then let them hear it." The woman with the envelope looked at him with a tired expression. "You still think there is one truth in this room?" she asked. "There are too many versions. That's the problem." Her voice was steady, but softer now, like someone who had reached the end of an argument that never had a real ending. A few cast members looked away, unable to meet her eyes. The host tried again to regain control. "This is not a legal proceeding," he said. "This is a reunion. We need to stop escalating this." But the word reunion itself triggered reactions. Someone laughed bitterly. "This stopped being a reunion a long time ago," a cast member replied. Another added, "This is a collapse." Then came a quieter interruption. A woman who had barely spoken all night finally stood near the back of the stage. Her voice was low but clear. "You're all missing something," she said. The room gradually turned toward her. She hesitated, as if choosing words carefully. "This didn't start with us fighting," she continued. "This started with people deciding what parts of us were worth showing to the world." The room slowed again. Her comment shifted the tone away from shouting and towards something uncomfortable but reflective. The woman with the envelope watched her carefully. "Say what you're trying to say," she replied. The woman nodded once. "We were all edited before we even got here tonight." That line landed differently. Some cast members looked confused, others uneasy. It was not an accusation between individuals anymore. It was a suggestion that something larger had shaped all of them long before this stage. The man with the document lowered his hand slightly. For the first time, he did not interrupt. The energy was shifting again, but not toward chaos this time, toward realization. Slowly, arguments began to fade, replaced by scattered silence and small, uncertain reactions. Even the audience seemed less reactive now, more focused on understanding than reacting. The host looked down for a moment, then back up. "We are not continuing tonight," he repeated, but softer this time. "Everyone will be escorted properly. There will be no further statements." That finality created a different kind of tension. Not explosive, but unresolved. The woman with the envelope placed her papers back inside carefully, one page at a time. She did not look at anyone while doing it. When she finished, she spoke one last time. "You all wanted a final fight," she said, "but what you got was a mirror." No one responded. Security began moving cast members gently but firmly toward exits. Some resisted, still demanding answers. Others complied quietly, drained. The man with the document looked back once at the stage, then lowered his hand and stepped away. The woman who spoke about editing followed slowly behind the others, not arguing anymore. As the lights began to dim slightly, the studio felt emptier even though it was still full. What remained was not resolution but fragments of conversations that would not close cleanly. And as the cameras continued rolling for a few final seconds, it became clear that the real story of that night was not what was said in anger, but what could no longer be contained once everyone stopped pretending. The studio doors closed behind the cast one after another, but the silence they left behind did not feel empty. It felt compressed, like pressure building in a sealed space that had not fully released. Crew members moved slowly now, avoiding eye contact, cleaning up objects that no longer looked ordinary under the harsh white lights. Chairs were straightened, microphones were removed. Papers that had been dropped during the chaos were collected carefully, as if even touching them too fast might bring the argument back. Outside the main stage area, the cast was being guided into separate corridors. No one walked together. No one spoke freely. The energy had shifted from confrontation to isolation. A few cast members looked back toward the studio entrance, as if expecting someone to call them back for one final explanation. No call came, only the sound of distant production chatter and the steady movement of security escorting people away in controlled silence. The woman with the envelope walked slightly ahead of the rest, her expression unreadable. She held nothing now, but her hands stayed closed, as if still carrying weight. One of the cast members tried to approach her from behind, but stopped when security gently redirected him. He spoke anyway. "You didn't have to take it that far," he said. She did not turn around. "It was already that far," she replied. In another hallway, the man with the document was arguing quietly with the producer. His voice was lower now, stripped of stage energy. "You knew this would blow up," he said. The producer responded without emotion. "We expected tension, not this level of exposure." That word lingered. Exposure. As if everything that happened had crossed a boundary nobody had clearly defined until it was too late. Down the corridor, a cast member who had cried earlier sat on a bench, staring at her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly as she scrolled through messages already spreading online. Reactions were flooding in fast. Clips, opinions, assumptions forming within minutes. Nothing official had been released, yet the audience had already created its own version of events. She whispered to herself, "They're going to twist everything," but no one answered. Back in the studio, the host remained on set for a moment longer, alone under the fading lights. He removed his microphone slowly, as if still processing the last hour. A producer approached and asked if he was ready to leave. He nodded but did not move immediately. "This is going to follow them," he said quietly. The producer did not respond. There was no disagreement needed. As the final cameras were powered down, the studio felt like it was returning to something older and heavier. Stripped of performance, silence filled the corners where arguments had once bounced back and forth. Even the echo of shouting seemed to fade into the structure itself, leaving only a faint memory of intensity. Outside the building, security vehicles were already preparing to transport cast members away separately. Some sat in silence, some still tried to speak, but conversations broke apart quickly, interrupted by exhaustion and disbelief. One cast member leaned back in her seat and said softly, "This wasn't a reunion. This was an ending. No one corrected her. Meanwhile, on phones across the city, then across different places, reactions continued growing. Fans replayed fragments of what they saw, trying to piece together a story that refused to stay consistent. Some blamed one side, others defended different names, but most agreed on one thing. Something had shifted permanently, not just between individuals, but within the entire structure of what they believed they were watching. Back at the studio exit, the woman with the envelope paused before stepping into the vehicle. She looked back once at the building. No expression of victory, no satisfaction, only distance. One of the crew members asked if she was okay. She replied, "This was never about okay." Then she got in the car and closed the door. As the vehicles pulled away one by one, the night did not feel resolved. It felt suspended, like a story interrupted in the middle of its most important sentence. And somewhere inside that unfinished feeling, everyone involved seemed to understand the same thing without saying it out loud. What happened inside that studio was not something that would end when the cameras stopped rolling. It had already moved beyond that point, into something larger, messier, and far more difficult to contain than anyone had planned for when the doors first opened. The convoy of vehicles moved slowly through the dim roads outside the studio, each car carrying its own silence. Inside, no one spoke at first. The earlier chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind exhaustion and scattered thoughts that nobody knew how to organize. The cast members were no longer reacting as performers or rivals, but as individuals trying to understand what had just happened to them in real time. Every phone buzzed at different moments, lighting up with messages, tags, and clips already circulating online. The speed of it unsettled them. It was as if the night had already escaped the studio and taken on a life of its own. In the second vehicle, the woman with the envelope sat by the window, watching the passing lights without focus. One of the producers in the front seat turned slightly. "You understand the network is going to respond to this," he said carefully. She nodded once, without looking at him. "They were already responding before it ended," she replied. That answer made him fall quiet again. There was no clear argument left to make, only consequences still unfolding. In another car, two cast members who had been arguing earlier now sat in silence, separated by space and pride. One of them finally spoke, his voice low. "None of this feels real anymore." The other responded after a pause. "It was real." That's the problem. That exchange did not lead anywhere else. It simply hung between them, unresolved, like everything else from the night. Back at the studio, cleanup continued deep into the night. Stage lights were dimmed but not fully turned off, casting long shadows across empty seats. A producer stood near the main platform where the envelope had been opened earlier. He picked up one of the stray papers that had fallen during the final moments, looked at it briefly, then placed it back down as if deciding it should not be kept. Another crew member approached and asked what the plan was moving forward. He answered without hesitation, "Damage control first, explanations later." But even he sounded uncertain about what explanations would be enough. Online, the situation had already grown beyond control. Short clips of shouting, accusations, and sudden reveals were being shared rapidly. Viewers were reacting in waves, trying to assign meaning to fragments without context. Some defended cast members they liked. Others demanded accountability based on incomplete footage. Narratives were forming faster than facts could follow. The reunion had ended on stage, but it had continued everywhere else without pause. In one of the vehicles, a cast member scrolled through comments and suddenly stopped. "They're already saying I was involved in something I didn't even hear about," she said, showing her screen to the person next to her. He glanced at it briefly and looked away. "They're saying that about all of us," he replied. That statement carried no comfort, only shared discomfort. The woman with the envelope finally spoke again, still looking out the window. "This is what always happens," she said quietly. "The moment people stop controlling the story controls them." The producer in the front seat did not respond immediately. After a few seconds, he said, "You think this is over?" She gave a small, tired smile. "No," she said. "This is the part where it spreads." Far behind them, the studio building stood quiet again, but not neutral. It had the feeling of something that had witnessed too much in too short a time. Inside, nothing moved except for the slow reset of a place preparing for another day that would never feel the same again. As the night deepened, each cast member returned to their own separate space, but none of them felt like they had truly left the reunion behind. Conversations would continue, explanations would be demanded. Sides would form and shift again. What had happened was no longer contained to one room, one taping, or one argument. It had already moved into memory, into speculation, into everything people would keep replaying long after the lights were gone. And in that lingering uncertainty, one thing became clear to everyone involved, even if no one said it out loud. The final fight was not the end of the story. It was the moment the story stopped belonging to them at all. The night finally settled into a strange stillness. But it was not peace. It was the kind of silence that comes after something breaks beyond repair. Each cast member was now inside their own world, separated by distance, by opinion, and by what they had either said or failed to say when it mattered most. Messages kept arriving, notifications stacking one after another, but none of them brought clarity, only more pressure, more confusion, more interpretation from people who had not been in the room, but now felt entitled to decide what had happened. The woman with the envelope remained quiet for most of the ride, her gaze fixed outside the window as the city lights blurred past. The producer beside her finally spoke, softer than before. "You know this will not end here." She did not turn her head. "It was never going to end here," she replied. There was no satisfaction in her tone, no victory, only acceptance of consequence. She understood that what had been exposed could not be placed back into silence, no matter how many statements were made afterward. Elsewhere, cast members sat in separate homes, hotels, and cars, replaying moments from the reunion in their minds. Some questioned their own reactions. Others focused on what had been said about them. A few tried to draft responses, then deleted them before sending. The weight of public attention was already forming around them, and they could feel it tightening with every passing minute. One message, one clip, one sentence was enough to reshape how they would be seen from that point forward. Back at the studio, the last lights were finally shut off. The stage that had once carried laughter, arguments, and confrontation now stood empty. Chairs had been arranged, but not with care. Cables still lay coiled in places where movement had been rushed. A crew member lingered for a moment before leaving, looking at the space as if trying to understand how it had turned so quickly from controlled production into something far more unpredictable. In the quiet aftermath, there was no official resolution, no clean ending, and no simple explanation that could hold everything together. What remained were fragments, different versions of truth scattered across people who would never fully agree on what really happened. And that uncertainty was exactly what kept the story alive beyond the studio walls. The woman with the envelope finally spoke one last time before reaching her destination. "People think the end is when everything is explained," she said. "But sometimes the end is when nothing fits together anymore." The producer did not respond. There was nothing left to add. And as the vehicles separated into different directions, it became clear that the reunion had not truly ended when the camera stopped rolling. It had only changed form. It now lived in conversations, in arguments online, in private reflections, and in the silence between people who once shared the same space, but no longer shared the same truth. If you have been following this story, tell what you think really happened in that final night. Was it truth finally coming out? Or just another layer of confusion in a world built on drama and perception? Share your thoughts, leave a comment, and stay tuned, because stories like this rarely end where the cameras stop.